Thank you for your kind introduction. I speak some German in between, so we've got some variety on the sound channel. I understand that we have simultaneous interpretation. After the introductory keynote by Volvo, we can say Agile is possible. Agile is possible, especially in automotive. A few years ago, that was still a question. I would like to talk about some experiences. The first thing is this very observation that by now we have eaten Agile. You can see it just about everywhere. It's already something like 20 years old, so not necessarily the latest. But the question that keeps coming up, well, have we really digested it? Can we really put it to life? I mean, the presentation from Volvo already built an ideal bridge along these lines. I would like to show a few examples from our own projects, a little case study from an OEM project, and in particular, I want to show you some aspects here and there which haven't yet fully been digested, like functional safety. How do I safeguard a complex system in very short cycles? We've just already heard a bit about it. The motivation for Agile along the lines of faster and more efficient is quite clear. We do have the challenge, of course, that has been visualized here in 2 dimensions. On the one hand, increasingly more stakeholders, people involved, different systems, different locations, and then a major increase in complexity. The buzzword in automotive is electrification, services, many other things. So this pinpoints the buzzwords to one thing. We definitely need agility plus. So what we can summarize here is that we do, of course, have principles shown in the top left corner. Those principles account for agility, like a strong team focus, like, for example, strong feature orientation, like, for example, a product and value orientation. Those are some fundamentals that we have internalized by now. They provide a lot of good, and we will have to step by step translate them into the dimensions that we have in Agile working. So we have ever-increasing business requirements through increasing complexity, then appropriate market requirements. Then there is the box of organization, the various dimensions, very complicated supply chains that have a role to play. We do have processes which do have the necessity of proving something, proving that a safety case is up to date, that cybersecurity requirements have been met. And of course, we've got rapidly growing technology. We just heard it, SOA, AutoSAR Adaptive. Throughout this day today and tomorrow, we will hear quite a bit more about the technologies that are here to come. I want to show a little example beforehand. That's our own experience that has been created over quite a few years already in the AutoSAR environment. We are active there. We have collected a lot of experience that we are building upon, with the major advantage that actually in Vector we are not only preaching Agile, we are living Agile, and we do this in a very sophisticated and complex environment with SLD, with this transition at the moment to AutoSAR Adaptive, and the extracts that we are showing here are only isolated examples. They follow up quite nicely with the Volvo presentation from just now. Of course, we've got the very same issues and topics of workbench and continuity, but also the various verification steps. So mere integration is not sufficient. We need static analyses. We need unit testing. We need a verification that runs automatically as a check before and then in delivery later on internally. We need to safeguard things in the face of the many variants that we have, so that then amendments, error connections and new functionalities can be contributed in a consistent way. So quite a few things have grown within Vector, not only in the AutoSAR environment, but also in the field of tools. But this shows quite impressively that we can create new things based on our treasure of own experiences, and we can always offer to our customers worldwide the hands-on experience, which certainly is important in this kind of a demanding issue and topic. So we've already heard it. On top of the classical agile procedures like Scrum or feature-driven development, we need a certain superstructure which makes sure that agility can become scaled, that it becomes applicable under all kinds of different framework conditions, which are driven, as I said before, by the dimensions of complexity, various locations, but also demands that come from safety critical requirements, from legislative requirements. Well, quite regularly then in consulting, we are dealing with most diverse projects where we work with diverse methods, and over time we have found that there are some that can be applied rather easily. Bear in mind Scrum of Scrum, for example. That's an optimum fit wherever you've already internalized Scrum. You just go for different stages or levels, and the great thing is that from mechanics to hardware to software, you can go on with it. And there are other models that we have recognized to be meaningful, for example, in connection with the company-wide portfolio, but they provide some weight and the customer put it under a nice denominator. So for many years we had the burden of a lot of formalism. Now we said we made Agile, we made the switch over to SAFe, and now we've got the burden again of formalism. And this field of tension, so we have to think about how much Agile in terms of framework will be necessary in order to implement the requirements. In Vector, we basically collected best practices for agility in the critical engineering ACE, as we call it. And that is more a modular toolbox and not the rigid kind of procedure. A little case study now on this topic in order to try and illustrate it a bit. This comes from the environment of an OEM with safety and security requirements, and that is right where I want to put the focus on. We have to be very cautious in our formulation, and the colleagues from Volvo hinted at that already. So we've got an increasingly more agile, more continuous environment that we are setting up. And as a matter of fact, we are talking about years. And this is not only because maybe we have to adjust Vector 2 licenses. I think we can get that done rather quickly. But in particular, we have to adapt mentalities. We have to adapt roles. We have to see how, with a division of labor, we can actually become more efficient. This is one of the extracts that we consider to be exciting. By way of an example, we took a look at how we can safeguard consistency across the various abstraction levels. The V isn't yet gone after all. It remains as an abstraction, even in agile procedures. Maybe it looks different, maybe a little bit like a W or whatever way you want to show it graphically. But the basic elements of abstraction, that I've got some requirements, then on some lower level, being and implementation, that's now as before. Of course, the linkage is by now different, and you have to realize that, because every once in a while you get this kind of a thinking, well, V is old-fashioned and waterfall, and now we need something all new, but then we happen to notice that the new thing only means leaving out proven things with new risks, because all of a sudden people don't have reasonable consistency anymore in their procedure. So I need to know interdependencies, and classical values like traceability also have to be maintained and cultivated. Earlier this year, we experienced quite a few projects, especially in the AutoSAR environment, with regard to this very complex topic. I have to integrate the things that are supplied to me as an OEM from various suppliers. So there are basic virtues like config management, traceability, and then linkage, test, and requirements engineering. They tend to disappear at the moment, people tend to kind of roll up their sleeves again and to do the work there, and that's a major risk if you nevertheless have to safeguard various integration levels, various interfaces. Necessarily enough, you have to keep working faster and faster, but you need to realize that the speed must not be at the cost of long and difficult integration later on the level of OEM Tier 1, because then we wouldn't have gained anything. Which means that we have to think about how in methodology and with tools we get a reasonable and fast synchronization. Like, for example, the safety case, in a case where currently means we've been working on it for more than a year. So the point there is that the time duration of about 1 week from a small change to the road release can be reduced to, let's say, something like 1 day, and then maybe even a couple of hours. But that is quite an effort, and the recommendation that we can give is a good continuous PLM tool chain. And then later this afternoon, when my colleague Mr. Zimmermann is going to further present on it, you can see what we have already developed in this field in agreement with AUTOSARs, but also in agreement with safeguarding consistency between most different disciplines. A last aspect that we keep having to consider as part of Agile transformation, that's culture and organization. I've got a rather simple scrum of scrums from 2 layers that I'm showing here, and this has been mapped for functional safety. And I cannot install a safety manager in each small feature team. We turned a weakness into a virtue, and we said, of course, we need one safety security manager for formal reasons, for governance reasons, but why not then just simply pursue the Agile principle of the product owner in the same way for safety? So I've got a safety owner in those Agile projects. Those are trained engineers who've got an idea of how they can do 2 things. The one thing, they are able to recognize influences that can be created through changing requirements. And secondly, wherever necessary, they can give to the safety manager the impulse of taking a second look so that later on we get the release as quickly as possible but as complete as possible. So if you so want, that's a semi-automatic traceability, but the effect is that we've got consistency in many distributed teams. Even if they are distributed globally, it doesn't have to be on one location. I will have the safety owner as an opportunity of scaling safety all the way down. In the same way, of course, possibly also for cybersecurity and other things. I would like to conclude with some experiences that we've gathered in some of our projects. And later on, I would like to invite you to address us, to come to us. There's much more to report. In the meantime, we've presented a nice poster on the topic of Agile with all of the facets. We've got it available outside at our booth. Feel free to take it. So the 4 elements: business, organization, process, and technology. So this means that I definitely need adjustments, no matter whether I call it tailoring or scaling. I need to be very much aware of the opportunities that I have, a closed model, an adapted modular box of methods. I need to introduce it step by step. I shouldn't underestimate the time required for organizational and cultural change in the organization if we wish to avoid a situation where there might be a fallback to prehistoric ancient times of very low process maturity. That is something that none of us wants, and the risks nowadays that are here to come in our safety-critical products, they are too high, those risks. We cannot do without systematic and understandable and reviewable safeguarding. So along these lines, we have collected quite a lot of experience, and of course, even in the future, we are more than willing to respond to your questions as part of the Congress and later on. And at the moment, I think we will also have time for 1 or 2 short questions. Thank you.